All right, we are now live officially. I love the practice sessions. I really do. I didn't even know those were a thing. But yeah. So um, those who tune in or end up watching this, so it looks like my mom's in the audience. That's cool. Hey, mom. And this is going to be I think it's our sixth conversation as part of the ATL Education Expo. This one, we're really talking about building student community is the theme. And I'm here with Brandon Martin from Close Ties. We might have one other person joining us. It looks like she might even be in the audience. I'm going to promote her to a panelist, see if that works. Yeah, we're also going to be joined by Nicole Young Turner. And Cole, is that you? Did you get in here? Oh, perfect. Okay, dope. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna spend a few minutes letting Brandon and Nicole each present about their organizations and how they support schools in creating community, which especially this year is such an increasingly important part of schools. And I think personally, I don't think schools do nearly enough to cultivate community. So I'm going to try to throw some fireball questions at them after they each present on their personal work, and we'll have a good conversation. Yeah, this is just a continuation. My name's Ian Cohen. I am the CEO of TARA and one of the hosts for this year's ATL Education Expo, with the whole goal of trying to bring together partners and practitioners like these folks who can really help schools take their community and their instruction to the next level. And all are located right here in Atlanta. And so I want to start by giving Brandon the floor, and if you could take 5-6 minutes, share your screen if you want to, tell us all about Close Ties, and then Nicole will pass it over to you.
Gotcha, let's do it. So I am a teacher, so I'm gonna do the awkward, I'm gonna share my screen announcement. I don't know why we always announce that we're about to do that, but we do. All right, so I'll go ahead and spend some time sharing our story of what Close Ties is and who we are. If I had to put it in like a 2-sentence synopsis, it would be we are a boys leadership program for boys grades 5 through 8. We focus on the reaching so that teachers can focus on the teaching. We know a lot of times teachers are like bogged down with having to, in addition to lesson plan and create lessons and implement lessons, then having to reach students. And that's where the gap is pretty much found. So we come in and fill that gap for teachers. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Brandon Martin. I am born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, which I'm seeing is a rarity nowadays. A lot of people have moved here. I was grown here, not flown here my entire life. I then moved to Athens, Georgia, where I attended the University of Georgia. I got my bachelor's degree in marketing for undergrad. After that, I continued my educational pursuit. I graduated from Columbia University in the city of New York with a master's in public school leadership, but came back to where my heart is in the city of Atlanta, Georgia. And here's where I discovered a huge problem. A lot of my Black male students will look at me and say, well, Mr. Martin, like, why in the world did you come back to this place and how did you do it? And why would you come back to Southeast Atlanta where you grew up? And I realized like this is a problem that not only I faced as a young boy growing up in Southeast Atlanta, but that Black boys are facing all around the world. The biggest issue is that there's an expanding opportunity gap preventing Black boys from reaching their full potential, whether it be motivation, whether it be confidence. The biggest thing has been the lack of opportunity that takes what they think they can do and what they actually end up doing and starts to separate those two things. So with that in mind, I knew that I had to do something outside of the classroom. I created Close Ties Leadership Program in 2016. We got our 501c3 nonprofit status in 2017 with this mission, which is to close the opportunity gap for Black boys by cultivating leaders through exposure, mentorship, and service. We will fulfill the vision that every one of our members leaves equipped with the tools to be successful in the pathways of their choice. We really focus a lot on choice because this could be something as big as what college I would like to attend, or something as small as what classes do I want to choose, because I've done the work, I have the tools to be able to choose. How? So we focus a lot on our mission with those 3 core principles of exposure, mentorship, and service. And those are the 3 pillars that we align our programming to. So I'll focus on a few of them through the lens of exposure. All of our programs for exposure are based on the belief that if kids can see it, they can be it. One of their favorite programs is called Passion Days. And this is an ongoing program where we have different professionals from many different realms come in and talk specifically to our boys about how they took their 12-year-old passions and make them into the professions that they are now as adults. So we've had everything from financial planners to police officers to poets to artists come in and really ignite some of the passions that our boys have now so they can see what is the trajectory of this passion or thing that I like to do. Additionally, we focus a lot on college tours. This is something that makes us a little different. So like I said, our members are from 5th to 8th grade, and they tour anywhere from 6 to 9 colleges in that 3 to 5 year span, 3 to 4 year span, as opposed to 0 to 1 college of students that are at their local schools. They aren't going to college tours in middle school. Our second pillar is mentoring. All of our programs are focused on the fact that mentors prove the possible. Here's Deshaun with one of his favorite mentors at one of our programs called Brotherhood Breakfast, where we not only align our members in our program with mentors, we also pair all the males in our schools where our program is located to have mentors as well. Additionally, we know that sometimes when you have an older mentor, the connection isn't there as much. So we have a program through Accountability Brothers where our members serve as mentors to younger students, not only in our program, but also in the schools we're located in as well. Last but not least is service programming. We know that servant leadership is the foundation for change. We serve alongside other large nonprofits. Here you see Keontae working at Books for Africa, doing community service with AIDS Walk, and Jose helps all the local nonprofits in the city of Atlanta. We also position service as a form of gratitude. So you see Alvin here with his favorite teacher, Ms. Walker, for Women's Appreciation Wednesday. We do that once a month. The boys just really take time to write gratitude cards and give them a nice token of appreciation each month. Our impact. So over the past 3 years, our boys have logged over 5,200 community service hours, and this is still growing even in a virtual environment. As I previously mentioned, they toured 6 to 9 colleges during their time in our program. Here's my favorite one. So these boys earned $20,000 in college scholarships. And I'll state that this is before ever entering anybody's high school. And we really accredit that to the fact that they've been exposed to what college is, exposed to HBCUs and PWIs and junior colleges. So they know the things that they need to do in order to make that dream a reality. And they are doing the work now in order to find scholarships for 8th graders. And in the past 3 years, we've gained $20,000 in college scholarships. So our boys don't necessarily ever leave us. So this 15 schools is really important to me because our boys leave the middle schools that they're in now after 8th grade. But I really wanted to make them continue to have close ties, right? So even though they're out in 15 different schools now, so we have alums that are in 15 different schools, they still keep very strong community. I have teachers who will email me from several different high schools and they're like, what is this close ties jacket that X student is wearing? What is this program? Tell me about it. So right now we have some boys who are in school and it's only them. We have some with 2 or 3 of them, some with upwards of 15 of them are in one school at a time. Last but not least, we've maintained a 100% satisfaction rating over the past 5 years, and that's on 3 different realms. So as far as teachers, students, and their parents, for all of our beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year surveys, we've received 100% satisfaction rate. So in a nutshell, that is Close Ties Leadership Program. If you would like to get connected with us, of course, we always welcome that. Our website is at the bottom. It's real simple, closeties.org, as well as our Instagram handle is close_ties if you'd like to see what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. That's Close Ties.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. So much of that resonates with me just because of my own background. But great presentation. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you to dive more into that. Now I want to pass it over to Nicole Young-Turner from Kaleidoscope Village. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm going to do the same thing. Please give me a second while I share my screen. It is second nature at this point. So, hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Young-Turner, and I am the founder of Kaleidoscope Village. And we are an education consulting firm, as well as a community nonprofit. And our goal and our mission is to elevate, educate, and empower LGBTQ youth in schools and communities. A little bit about myself. Brandon, I share the same thing with you. I am born and raised in the A. I was a public school student all the way K through 12, and then went to Georgia Tech, right in the middle of Atlanta, where I graduated in 2011. I joined Teach for America, where I served as a 5th grade teacher up in Gwinnett County. So a lot of hometown love, a lot of grounding here in my city of Atlanta. I am a brave educator, meaning I have been out. I identify as a lesbian woman, and I have utilized my identity to really chart my path and my leadership toward Kaleidoscope Village. A fun fact that I just would love to share. I met the late John Lewis in high school, and I just think it's one of those moments that now when I look back, I am just so honored to have met someone who has made such an impact in our world, and I hope to be as impactful as him one day soon. All right, before we get into what Kaleidoscope Village is, I would love for you all to just, work with me and imagine. Imagine waking up every day in terror, anxious to go to school because as soon as you get there, students are calling you names and teachers are ignoring them, not because of anything you did, but truly because of who you are. Imagine getting suspended or even expelled because although your attire is in dress code, it's too feminine or too masculine. Imagine being kicked out of your home by your family simply because of the identity of someone you're attracted to. And now imagine having no safe place, no positive role models, and no school or support systems in your community to reach out to. Unfortunately, this is the reality for the majority of our LGBTQ students of color, and we are here to change that. I'd like to talk a bit about the experiences of our LGBTQ students of color across the nation. This data comes from research from students from kindergarten through 12th grade, as well as families and educators. Our LGBTQ students of color are 3 times more likely to experience school push out. These issues are super systemic and very intersectional. Our students of color that are LGBTQ in schools are experiencing higher policing, higher surveillance, and harsher punishments for some of the same infractions as their heterosexual peers of color. 82% of LGBTQ students of color have been verbally harassed and assaulted in the school building. And what's even more jarring and shaking is that it's not just students. They also report educators and adults in the building being unsafe and dangerous for them. And one other piece that's just really resonating with me as well is that it's not just our LGBTQ youth that are getting negative messages and negative reflections of what being LGBTQ means. 77% of all youth have heard family members and adults say negative things about LGBTQ people. I paint this picture for you because oftentimes LGBTQ issues are invisible. LGBTQ people come from all different backgrounds. Our students are from the Black community. Our students are from Indigenous communities. And oftentimes their experiences with gender identity and affectional orientation are not noticed at all. And when they are noticed, we notice that our teachers do not have the tools to be equipped to support our students. So here's where Kaleidoscope Village comes in. Our mission is to elevate the diverse voices and experiences of our LGBTQ community, those of us who have been invisibilized and silenced. The next pillar we have is that we want to educate all school and community leaders in culturally responsive and socially emotionally, I'm sorry, you all, I am bombing right now. Okay. Been a long day. We want to educate all school leaders, all school and community leaders in cultivating affirming and equitable and inclusive environments and create safe spaces and enriching experiences so that everyone in our village can thrive and connect. How we serve. So we offer customized learning journeys, research-based tools, and youth and community programming focused on enhancing this safety and inclusion for our LGBTQ students of color, as well as promoting allyship across the school with our students and educators and families. So we offer leadership learning journeys, which are staff training sessions that really cover the foundational concepts of LGBTQ inclusion with the intersectional lens. And those workshops are a little bit different from the normal workshops because in those spaces, we are actively working to include strategies in our pedagogy, include strategies in our classroom management that will immediately have an impact on not just LGBTQ students, but all of our students. We also offer strategic consulting and coaching. We know that this work is very individual. We know that things happen to different students based on their backgrounds and their family makeup. So we offer that one-to-one coaching and that one-to-one advising to educators and leaders on how to support their students and families in ways that are empowering and healthy and safe. We also conduct school culture assessments to be able to provide policy and practice recommendations to ensure sustainable, inclusive environments. Next, when we think about the empowerment pieces, we are offering in-school youth programs to, again, provide those safe spaces for students who identify as a part of the LGBTQ community so that they are able to really grow and develop in healthy ways and have role models and positive support systems within the school as well as within the outside of the community. And our last piece is family and community experiences. One thing that we really strive to do, again, is bring in this whole village approach where we support our families with resources, handbooks, and guides on how to affirm their student and affirm their student. And we also put on community experiences to celebrate the LGBTQ community and build solidarity. So that is what Kaleidoscope Village is doing. This is our first year in operation, and we are really excited to partner with a suite of charter schools up in Ohio. So we are in Atlanta, but we are also understanding that LGBTQ students experience discrimination and challenges in schools nationwide, and we are definitely here to support your inclusiveness goals. So here is our contact information. Our new website is being launched on Monday, but if you would like to schedule a consultation or even just to connect, please email us at kaleidoscopevillage@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram at Kaleidoscope Village, Facebook, Kaleidoscope Village, and Twitter, Kscope Village. Thank y'all so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. And apologies for turning around a couple times while you were presenting. My puppy is trying to get my attention constantly. But I'm really excited to talk about this topic. First of all, congratulations to both of you and your programs and organizations for all the progress that you've made. And why I'm so eager to dig in with you all in this discussion is because I'm going to get kind of heated in this probably because community is so critical to a student being in a position to believe in themselves and have success. And yet, as both of you and your experiences are showing us, it's not core to the school experience. And so when we're going to dig into why we think that is, but I'm actually going to do this in sort of an opposite way. I'd love to hear from each of you, and Brandon, we'll start with what would an ideal school community look like if you could sort of describe it at a high level? Because I feel like a lot of times we talk about all of these things, but we don't give people a clear enough picture about what would a school look like if it actually did intentionally create community and make it supportive and positive for everybody involved. So in your mind, and I know you're still working in the classroom, what would that look like if community was a central piece as opposed to a supplemental one for you?
And looking at Nicole's vision, like the biggest part that stuck out to me was like elevating voices. And I feel like the like epitome of community is where everyone's voice can be elevated. It dwindles when like voices are diminished. So you have, for us, we're just representing two groups of diminished voices. That's being Black males of color, or you have students who identify as LGBTQ community. The voices have been muted. And so we aren't part of many communities, even when they're communities of people who physically may look like us, like you still aren't a part of that community. So I think that a school that is intentionally built ways for voices to be elevated, to be heard, even if they disagree, that aren't harmful. I think that is the biggest way to like build a community that has elevated voices of many different groups.
So what does that look like in practice? I want to push you a little further with it.
Love
you
it.
know, give me an example of how students could actually have their voices elevated in practice.
In practice, it looks like planned things to happen, right? So we know that students are going to disagree at things. How is it? We have all the different routines for how we walk places and go things and like eat things and how first 5 minutes of class should look like. What does it look like when we disagree? Do we just mute students and not let them have a debate about what it is? What does it look like when students don't agree with the policy that the school has? Like, what is the way that they can go about voicing their concerns? What does it look like for students to have each other's back? Like, if I see that something is happening, like, will I be suspended? Am I afraid? So like, what are the policies in action that promote voices to be elevated?
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think there's research out there that talks about the difference in self-advocacy that students who grow up in affluent environments and affluent schools come up with, like someone like myself who grows up and you're sort of taught that you're supposed to speak up for yourself, and you have people who become fierce advocates. But if you are teaching in an environment where it's actually anytime students try to speak up or debate or conflict, even if, because, you know, part of it is because they don't do it in maybe the most mature way, but they're kids. But that has a chilling effect over time, right? Nicole, I'd love to hear your perspective. What would this ideal school look like if it actually intentionally centered community and elevated voices like you and Brandon both described?
Absolutely. The first thing that comes to my mind is an environment that truly embodies a liberatory mindset. I think we do think a lot about the students, right, and how freely they can move. But I think that has a lot to do with leadership and educators, right? So what does it look like, or what would it look like for all of our educators and all of our leaders to go through the same exact training that Brandon was mentioning, or the same exact experiences where we learn how to have conflict with each other? We learn how to be in dialogue and not debate. And we really learn how to continue to build relationships across all types of lines of differences, and truly having not only the training for those skills, but in integrating those skills and those practices in our everyday way of operating with each other is one thing that I really think is important. And another really huge piece of that liberatory mindset is being in a space to be self-reflective and being in a space to really be open about your biases and your blind spots. And I think sometimes, and I have been very guilty of it, sometimes as teachers, we're so focused on educating and imparting knowledge that we don't really think about what our students are teaching us and what new perspectives they're giving us. And so I do think that does take a bit of work on, again, the educator and leadership side, to do some inner work so that we can allow that space for the voices to be elevated.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I want to follow up with you as well on this, because you do a lot of work with teachers and staff. And whereas Brandon's program works a lot directly with the students. And obviously everybody has a role to play here. And as a former teacher myself, I know the feeling of like being in a staff meeting, hearing a bunch of policy decisions or just general logistical choices that I super don't agree with. And then I'll just, but you know, I can go back to my room, shut the door and have my little kingdom. And I can be, you know, and I could tell the kids how I feel if I wanted to, which is obviously not the positive thing to do. But I'm curious of like, Nicole, from your experiences, how can what discussions are not happening between teachers and between teachers with other teachers and also between teachers with administrators, and why do you think that's not happening? Like, how can we push this forward?
Absolutely. Well, I actually want to think about some instances that I've come into with work with Kaleidoscope Village. One thing about the LGBTQ community and this identity in general is that it's so stigmatized in more socially that in schools, educators and principals are just scared to have the conversation. I think there's a lot of fear-based action that happens. And that's why voices are being muted. That's why decisions are being made without everybody's voices being at the table. And so when I think about what conversations need to be had that aren't being had, they are conversations that do require vulnerability. They are conversations that require us to be honest about the way we were taught to think about things, and be honest about when we were wrong, and be honest about when we may have been harmful. And I think, again, those conversations are very difficult when you don't have a culture of community and you don't have a culture of building relationships across lines of difference. Another key piece that I think I am seeing, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion work, is this tension between what has worked, and we have a lot of data around what has worked, and what's new, right? And what really can be. And that's really new territory. And I think there just, again, is this fear of trying something new, going into human relationships with a design thinking mindset, where we lead with empathy and we just continue to grow and have discussions around vulnerability. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And there's so many directions I could take this conversation, and I'm trying to decide which one to pursue. I guess let's start at the top. Let's start at a principal. Imagine you're a principal where you're talking directly to your principal in a completely safe environment. You know, what suggestions would you give to them as a way to start down this path of creating a more open, inclusive, and supportive community. You know, this isn't meant just to be like, all right, we want everybody to feel free to yell at each other and argue, but it's also like we want people to be in a position where they feel supported, which is not only one of the biggest reasons teachers leave the classroom, but we also know, as all of our experiences can tell us as educators, it's why a lot of students don't thrive in the classroom. They don't necessarily know or think that people are standing behind them and believe that they can achieve something more than just passing the standardized test at the end of the year. So, you know, what would be your message to a school leader, Brandon, if you're saying, all right, this is the first step towards trying to actually be more intentional and creating a positive, supportive community at your school?
I think the biggest first step, I know a lot of people will say like, my door is always open for feedback, and that's not the right idea, right? Like you have to go and get it. So I think the biggest first step is just to seek feedback around places where people are not feeling supported, because we can create a whole plan, right? And completely miss the target because we haven't really identified where the gaps are. So it starts, I mean, there's some pre-work in that of like, do people even feel comfortable giving you feedback, right? So like there's some pre-work before that, but I think the first major step in a nutshell is creating a space where you can get feedback about where are the places that people do not feel supported, and inviting them to the creation table of the plan versus just the implementation table of the plan. So like, I heard what you said and I created this plan and like, here's how we're going to do it, versus like, I heard what you said. Now let's create together a plan that will help you feel supported in this place, and finding trends where we see that people are not feeling supported.
Yep. Nicole, what do you think? What would be a first step for a principal?
Yep, absolutely. I definitely think the first step is connecting with your community, much like Brandon said. Connecting with people in the spaces. First of all, creating space, right? Creating space for people to actually connect with you and give you feedback and understand what's going on. Not only just with your educators, but what's going on with your entire community, right? How are your students feeling? How are your parents feeling? And really create focus group space, really particularly planned time and programming for you to understand what the challenges are and where the areas of opportunity are. I think that's definitely the first step, doing that assessment in a more human-centered way. I think the second step that I have actually been a part of with some of my principals that I support is honestly, again, going back to that self-reflection. My principals have been, with the work that I do around LGBTQ inclusivity, they have been very open around, actually, this is where our leaders need support before we can actually provide support to our educators and before our educators can provide support to our students. And so I think that scaffolding is still important on the leadership level, as we're all growing in not only just skills, but we're growing in mindsets. We're changing our mindsets and we're changing the way that we absolutely view the world. And I think that is an important first step, again, creating space for those different communities to give input, but also creating space for you to be open and not just reflective, but very self-assessing around where you have the gaps before, again, trying to push out a plan or a strategy.
No, that's really great. I totally think those are amazing steps for a principal, just starting with the self-assessment, right? And getting a sense for what do my teachers, parents, students feel about how the community is structured right now. But let's get down to brass tacks here. Let's be honest with ourselves, be a little bit more cynical, because we know that schools and school leaders are under a lot of pressure to make the grade, so to speak, according to the things they're assessed on. The state assessments. I know there's a school climate survey here in Georgia now as part of the overall rating system. And one of the biggest pushbacks that I've gotten personally when I've tried to do some of the work similar to what you all do, I'm curious if you've experienced this, is how do you measure community? Like, how can I directly tie the impact of community to what I'm held accountable for? Because we know that schools right now are very compliance oriented. And, Nicole, to your point earlier, it's one of the reasons a lot of folks shy away from diving into LGBTQ topics or other topics like that, which are not mandated and really just feel like, if you're looking at this from a compliance standpoint, high risk, no clue as to what reward we're going to get out of this, which obviously we all know that there's significant reward to be had, not to mention it's the right thing to try to do. But when we're talking about brass tacks, like, what principals and schools are judged on, that's not on the list of things. And so you guys are working with principals or other teachers. How do you talk to them about, hey, this is going to have an impact, and how do you measure that success? What are some of the things that you focus on when deciding whether what you've done is successful for you and for the school? And I'll open up to either of you if you want to take it.
I would say I'll answer the first part of your question first. Like, thankfully, when we first were founded 5 years ago, we were with a principal who understood initially. So I haven't had to like experience principals who are like, well, this won't work. Like, what is the purpose? How will I measure this? Like, what will happen? Which kind of gave us the ability to get our footing first. So then we could prove, like, here's where our boys were before, here's where they are now. Like, mentally, like academically, socially, here's how they can balance the different things that you're throwing at them as a school. And like, we were able to show this was this child in 5th grade versus 6th grade, look at their growth. But then they got in our program in 6th grade, here's them from 6th to 7th. And you can ask them, like, we'll account for how close size had a change in that. And like, we have feedback from parents, we have feedback from the students, feedback from individual teachers who actually like looped with the kids over years. So like, I can clearly see a difference in their motivation. So a lot of it is soft skill stuff, right? So like a lot of maybe the work that Nicole does is like in comfort level, right? So like that doesn't show up on a scale. However, if a student feels comfortable in a classroom, I'm going to achieve more, right? Like if I feel more included, I will achieve more. So I think the hardest part that I've faced so far is like showing how the soft skill does turn into the hard fact and the hard data. And that has to happen over time. So I know with a lot of the like requirements and things like, well, I need to see this tomorrow. And I'm like, it's not gonna work like that, right? Like it just won't. But showing over time and like having some kind of footing in proof then gives you like a tool in your tool belt to go to a new principal or a new school and say like, hey, this is what it is. So I think that's what's like what I've experienced, and that's what's worked for our program so far.
Gotcha. Nicole, how about you?
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think another key piece to that question is really, again, pulling back the curtain on like, what does this hard data mean, right? When we're looking at test scores, that is the culmination of not only what this student has learned and gained academically, but how this student felt in the classroom, how engaged this student was, how supported this student was. And something that we really look at Kaleidoscope Village is disciplinary records, right? And we're looking at hard facts, we're looking at truancy, we're looking at, the students who are showing up to class. We are noticing that with our training with teachers, but as well as with our Pride Alliances that we set up in schools, the students that before coming to the Pride Alliances were doing way worse, and not just like worse academically, but just worse in social emotional development, worse in test scores, worse in the way that they were creating relationships with other students. After, 3 to 4 Pride Alliances, we have data where, and I'm talking about one particular student, we have data where this particular student literally did a 180. And so although that is very anecdotal, much to Brandon's point, this takes time because we are people and we are truly transforming cultures and environments. However, this work is directly connected to academic achievement. LGBTQ students face serious mental health issues that are very apparent in the way that they show up in school and the way that they show up in academic progress. And so really being very clear about how these socio-emotional learning concepts and goals connect to the academic goals have been really, really important. And again, also, like Brandon said, really finding principals who understand that DEI and culturally relevant pedagogy is not a nice to have, it is the foundation of liberatory education. And so finding folks that are great partners and that will be in the work with you to see that long-term impact is important.
Yeah, it's an investment, right? Like this is about creating a culture at your school so that any student who comes through it will be in a position to have success. Because I think too often, and again, I think the incentives are not necessarily aligned to promote this for principals, but most of the time it's, all right, we're going to do as much as we can for these kids, but then they're going to be gone next year. So we have new kids to worry about. In reality, it's like, well, you have the institution to worry about, right? Because the culture is what's bringing in students, helping them grow, and then helping them move along. And I feel like too often take such a narrow view. It's like, all right, well, it's just these students right now, and I got to do the best I can with just these students. It's like, well, you're trying to build an institution that has lasting and sustainable power and success, right? I want to turn our attention to this year and how the pandemic has impacted y'all's work and also just generally students everywhere. And also remind people, if they have questions, feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We'll definitely get to them. With just Nicole and Brandon, we have a more intimate discussion right here. So I'm down to talk about whatever issue comes up. But I want to turn to COVID and its effect on students that you've seen and teachers that you've worked with. And then also, what do you think it's told us about the importance of community? So Brandon, how's COVID really impacted the students that you work with? Especially give a sense of like, do they feel supported? What has it told you about the need for support going forward?
Initially, and I'm sure it's happened with all of our different organizations, we came to a halt because we're like, what in the world is happening? Like, how does this work? So we had to pivot a lot to not doing so much group to like individual connections, which I think the challenge in that was that students weren't really able to see that there were so many people going through the exact same things that they were going through and the same like scary ideas that they had, right? Like when we were all together as a community, we could see that. So it was up to me then to like connect these stories into one similar storyline. So the students were comforted in the fact that they knew that they weren't the only ones that were experiencing these things. Just similar to how our community was when we were back in school, the exact same thing was still happening. I think that it has affected us positively in the way of just knowing to check in with people. So a lot of times our boys would just see each other in school and like, that's when they would see each other and know each other, like see whatever you posted on Instagram, when we all know that like I could just post my highlight reel and this is what we're doing. This is the great things versus like really and seriously checking in with one another before something bad happened, right? Like calling each other, getting on a Zoom call, whatever it may be. Like you don't have to physically be with someone to check in with them. I think that that has been the biggest thing that has like opened our eyes as an organization. I would say as currently a teacher in the classroom still, so like outside of being a leader of a nonprofit, that challenge still shows, right? So like I can't really tell what's happening in your life in that screen behind that. So it's a lot more parent communication. It's a lot more connection, which I wouldn't think initially would happen. I feel like I'm more separated, but I have better relationships with the parents now. And I've actually never even taught physically in the school where I am. I started as a virtual teacher at a new school and feel very connected with the community due to the fact that like I've had to make those calls. I'm on FaceTimes with kids and parents and like hop on a Zoom call, show you how to do the thing versus before, like
Right.
school is over, we're out, y'all be blessed. Like don't FaceTime me at all. So now I feel like that line of communication is open and I hope that that continues post-pandemic as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. Nicole, how about you? What have you seen during the pandemic and how's it impacted your work with educators?
Absolutely. I definitely want to focus on students. So when the pandemic hit, like you said, we were like, what are we going to do? How are we going to support students? And many of our LGBTQ students, even before the pandemic, experienced just isolation and family rejection and not really having community even in the school building. And so Kaleidoscope Village, we were truly worried and looking out for, our students who just didn't have access to the safe spaces that they even had, outside of their home. So there were instances where, again, we had to be more proactive and be more, and reach out more to our students around where they can go, who they can reach out to before they get to a place of, challenging mental thoughts or self-harm. So that was one piece. But to the other piece that Brandon brought up is that this has absolutely helped us, especially in the LGBTQ community and our allies, kind of break through some of the homophobia that exists in these institutions and break through some of the gender phobia that exists and create online communities and create communities outside of the school buildings and outside of the institutions that truly have been catching our students and creating communities that haven't existed before. So for example, we started again virtual pride clubs where not only it's just one school students who are there, but we have multiple schools of LGBTQ students who are coming into a virtual space and having community circles and learning and having great programming. Another piece to that is that our students have been holding online virtual book clubs. And so not only have we been, again, being able to elevate and come together online during the COVID pandemic and really support each other, like Brandon said, we're able to even add on some additional new pieces that weren't always welcomed inside of the school building walls.
No, that's great to hear. And I think, like educators everywhere, We get creative real fast when conditions change because that's part of the job. So now I'm curious. There's a lot of talk right now as we kind of try to go back in, but really our sights are set on next year. There's this sort of two-sided conversation where on the one hand, folks are saying, some students are having a lot more success academically in a virtual environment because they don't necessarily feel the social pressures that come with being in a school and being distracted and being as much as I can remember about being a kid, like you spend most of your time thinking about the other kids around you and all the social, things, especially middle school and high schoolers. But then on the flip side are conversations like these where we also know that, being at home all the time and being in a virtual environment, it's not the best necessarily way or conducive way to create community all of the time and to get to a place where you really know what's happening. Like it's very dependent on the student being forthright with you about how things are going. You don't get as many organic opportunities to really understand or see or read body language. And so, I feel like we're not talking about how those two things are kind of opposed to one another. Like there's a lot of folks saying, hey, I want to keep my virtual learning option. It's like, all right, but to what extent? So I'm curious where you all think this is going to take us. Do you think that's going to be some sort of hybrid thing? Or do you think we're just going to snap back and go to the same thing we were doing before the pandemic? And, over a couple of years from now, forget this was even a thing? That's a toss up. Anybody wants to take it? We can keep going, Brandon, Nicole. It's all good to me.
Okay, I'll go first. I think that a lot of the large districts have already determined that we're going to do a hybrid model. My district hasn't determined that for next year. And I can see pros and cons on both. However, I think that saying that students don't have to deal with the social issues at home is not a band-aid to fix that the social issues still exist. So to say like, I don't have to deal with bullying because I'm at home, that does not fix bullying as an issue. So to say I don't have to deal with homophobia at home, that doesn't fix that. So I have to feel with like feeling excluded at home, that doesn't fix that. And so when our students are like then thrust into some other place, whether it be they stay virtual until they went to college, and then now I have to be put back into a physical space, or like stay virtual until I got a job at a like community center. Now I'm like working in this space where I still have to build the skills. So I feel like we can't negate that these issues still exist because we have students at home. So when it is messaged in that realm, I'm like, I completely disagree with that. And I feel like it is a way that like is pushing an agenda of like, now there are no more issues versus like the issues actually still exist. And we have to hit those like head on, because if not, they'll appear virtually, right? Like I'll be in the chat saying whatever I want to say. I like screenshot your picture and like post it. So they will appear. They haven't appeared as much, right? But like they will rear their ugly faces eventually. So we have to focus on that issue.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, the education space seems to always be attracted to something that seems like a silver bullet, right? It's like, oh, well, this is just so much better than the other thing. But to your point, and it's the same thing goes with like learning math or like acing assessments. It's, when we figure out something we think works, or like building out data rooms. That's like a whole thing right now. Oh, we need a physical place where everyone puts data on index cards. It's like, it's just, we're trying to get to a place where this is a messy business, right? Like educating young people is messy because nobody grows at the same pace and the same direction. We've got all kinds of things going on in their lives. Nobody's the same. But to your point, Brandon, I think when we see, oh, well, virtual, like they don't have any social problems anymore. Well, that's not true at all, right? They're still kids. They're still going to have social issues. They could be at home. There's like a million things, including everything you listed. Nicole, I'm curious about your opinion on this. Is like, what should we take away from the students who are having some success in a virtual model as we look to hopefully get back to in-person learning next year?
Absolutely. I've definitely been thinking long and hard about this. And I think even before COVID hit again, thinking about neurodiversity, right? And like what environments and in what ways do our students learn best? So when I think about even some of our under-resourced schools, many of our students actually didn't even have the wireless access or the technology access that they got access to because of the pandemic. And so I think that's something that we're not looking at, is that our students are doing better ostensibly because they were provided with more resources to be able to do so. So I think that is something that we should take away, that, I think the community came together, that our students who needed it the most got it. And so I want us to take that back into the space once we are all safe and vaccinated. Another piece that I am excited about is that we can utilize online online platforms and online learning to continue to build community, right? So instead of using the virtual environment as a reason why someone, like you said, who's being bullied or who doesn't feel accepted at school to stay at home, how do we build these environments so that we're able to connect these students with other students? We're able to have these dialogues and conversations like we were talking about before. So I'm excited to see how we use technology to push forward community, how we use technology to continue to accommodate and celebrate neurodiversity while still really attacking these issues head on, both in the virtual world and in the physical world. Because honestly, as adults, our students are going to have to navigate on a professional level virtual environments as well as in-person environments. So I don't want to strip it away, but I do want us to utilize it for good and not to ignore the issues that exist in our society.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I definitely think it's the fact that some students actually were finally given the tools at home to do advanced work. We certainly are rapidly progressing to a place where internet access may be a universal right in this country at this point. But I also think that you raised a good point too, is that, I don't want anybody to take away from this conversation that like, oh, students need to be coddled and overly supported and everything needs to be easy. I personally am totally against that. I think what we're talking about is creating a culture that allows them to strive and be pushed without feeling terrible, and while developing a strong, confident self-image as opposed to one that's constantly filled with uncertainty and doubt. And so I'd love to ask you each, like, because a lot of these programs, Brandon, your program is a perfect example of like things that we use to augment the school day. And there's a ton of pressure put on schools with seat time, right? Like you got to have the kids in the seats and teaching lessons. And if you spend time, there's usually like 25 minutes for lunch, where like teachers have 6 minutes a day to go to the bathroom because we need every minute we have in the classroom. And I think all three of us agree that building community takes effort and intentionality, and also pays big dividends. But building community is not necessarily a form of seat time. But if you were talking to an enterprising teacher or school leader, how might they insert more intentional community spaces, or at least opportunities to create community in their normal school day? Whether it's a teacher or a principal, how might they go about doing that?
Want to go first, Nicole?
I am a huge fan of community circles. I know that they have become a lot more popular, and for good reason, and a lot more, there's a lot more resources and guidance for educators. But I think about 8 years ago, my time in the classroom, I started my day every day, rain or shine, no matter what the lesson plan was, no matter what was being mandated, with those dialogues, with those community conversations, and really bringing in topics that resonated with the students, that represented what they were experiencing in their cultures and at home, but truly having, again, these really intense and deep, not necessarily always intense, but deep dialogues where critical thinking was very much encouraged, and where even I, again, as a teacher, showed up in a vulnerable way. And I think about the pushback that I got, from my principal for very good reason, thinking about some of those data points that we had to hit at the end of every year. My students just far exceeded academically other students in the building and other teachers who weren't making that intentional time, even when we felt like it wasn't there. So I don't want to say we should do all these things. I honestly think it starts with truly starting the day, or having some time in the day where your students feel like they are connected with you and connected with each other. And I think that's how the community begins to build, and those soft skills are not only taught, but actually practiced so they can be sustained in our students' lives.
I think that's a great idea. Go ahead.
I think a big part that I've seen in my school district, and I've seen it in a lot of different ways, but it's worked like over the whole board. I think the biggest part is like creating a sense of belonging. So however you can do that in your school. So in my previous school, we did it based on homeroom settings, right? So like they all knew that they were in my homeroom, and they were called UGA because that's my undergrad. And like they built a community in that space with kids who had all different beliefs. We had athletic kids, we had artistic kids, we had all different kind of kids, but like they knew that they belonged to UGA and they protected one another. When if that wasn't the case and we didn't build that homeroom community, then it would have been, that's your friend group, this is my friend group, this is my friend group. But they knew that when they came into this building, and it followed them in every single class, that like they were UGA. So whether it came to like academic competitions or fundraisers or anything of that sort, they were all working because they knew that they belonged together. Now at my new school, we work in advisory cohorts. So we have advisory groups, which I love because now it's only like 12 students. So we can have that closer contact. And every single teacher has an advisory group. No matter if you're the dance teacher, the math teacher, it doesn't matter. You have an advisory group. And like they belong to that advisory group. So I saw these boys who I had who've been in school with each other from kindergarten all the way through 4th grade. And they came to 5th grade. And I'm like, y'all don't know each other? They're like, no. And I'm like, didn't y'all go to school with each other for 4 years? How do you not know each other? You know, like what? And to see their growth now coming in, having that advisory group, are they all best friends? No. Do they respect differences? Most definitely. And it's even bigger, like on a broadcast stage now that we're virtually, because you can see in the back of some kids' homes a nice double spiral staircase and all these other things. And some other kids do not have that. I wasn't a kid that had that, still don't have a spiral staircase in my house now. But nonetheless, like they've built that community knowing that they are in Mr. Martin's advisory group. And these are the things that we do. These are the routines that start all of our days. And I think so that consistency and just ownership and like belonging can be built without losing any seat time at all.
Yeah, I think those are both really great options for teachers, especially. I remember when I taught at Bannock High School, where we were the Rams, or Trojans, we were the Trojans. My high school growing up was the Rams. And every time my students left at the end of every period, I wouldn't let them leave until somebody would yell BHS, and everybody else would have to respond with Trojan Pride. They hated it. They hated it for the first month or two. But then, you know, it became a thing that you do together, right? Even something little like that, I think, is in the direction that we're talking about. Did it transform student lives to say Trojan Pride coming out of the classroom? No, it didn't. But it's to what each of you are saying, it's like it's about building a culture of working together and being together. So I want to close this out here with a final question, just an easy, short one. You know, when you think about the future of education and really out to the year 2050, what do you think education, and specifically building community within education, should look like in our system by 2050? Not a big question. I know it's pretty easy to answer, but go ahead and give your best shot. I think we need to think more intentionally about the future of education. And obviously I'm being facetious about, this is an easy question, but when you look at the year 30 years away from now, we want a much better system based off everything we're learning today. What would that look like in your mind, specifically around student community and teacher and educator community overall? So I'll let each of you take a crack at it before we close out here. Nicole, why don't you kick us off this time?
Definitely, I've been thinking about this question. When I think about 30 years from now, and I'm thinking about the movements of anti-racist education and decolonizing education and truly moving toward a space where education is not just reflecting the world that we live in, but it's also like being the North Star for the world that we want to live in. That is what I want to see. And when I think about that, it is truly, again, this idea that every single person, no matter their identity, no matter their backgrounds, are in spaces in education where they're not only feeling safe, but they are feeling empowered to lead and advocate because of who they are. We're not muting voices. We're not having hierarchies of who's better or worse based on ability or based on identity. And so I am hoping that education can truly like set the stage for the transformations that we're calling for in our nation and honestly in our world.
I love that. Thank you for diving on that question, which I know is not a simple one. Go ahead, Brian. What do you think?
Everything Nicole said. But no, seriously, I think of education as a way to build advocates in students outside of the building. So the progress that we've been making now that I've seen from my perspective has been inside of the walls of this school. This is our community. But when our students walk out, they don't see that, right? And like, it takes a whole different step to now be an advocate. Like, this is what I learned in my school, and this is what I'm now going to bring to my community, versus my voice is elevated here and completely silenced here. So I just continue to walk in silence. So I see education as a way that we can build this community inside that then bleeds out. And so our students walk out as advocates to, for Nicole's point, like speak towards LGBTQ rights versus like I go and I hear my uncle talk about these things. And although I know that's not tolerated in my school and like we don't really talk about that there, I don't say anything because that's what's expected here. So I'm thinking of like education as a way that like what is expected in this place is now expected everywhere. And you have now been empowered to be an advocate to take what you learn here into community spaces that can then transform communities versus just transforming the classroom or the building that we live in now.
Awesome. Well, I think both of those are very compelling visions that I wholeheartedly agree with, and hopefully we're taking a small step towards them with conversations like this today. So I just want to close out by saying, again, this is our 6th conversation as part of the ATL Education Expo. It'll be up on YouTube tonight, and we'll be sending it out this weekend to all the attendees. I want to thank Brandon Martin, the founder of Close Ties Leadership Program, and Nicole Young-Turner, the founder of Kaleidoscope Village, for all of their input and also handling my wide variety of questions. My name is Ian Cohen. I'm the CEO of TARA Education Technologies. We appreciate everybody who's able to join us, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.